Welcome to the Regents Roundtable. I'm Stephen Ludwig. My guest today is Kyndra Wilson. Kyndra is a brand marketing strategist that has worked in higher education or with higher education institutions for the past 20 years doing brand strategy, research, and marketing planning. She has worked with university leaders and directly with trustees and regents at large, well-known universities, smaller public institutions, several community college systems, and small private liberal arts colleges. Over her career, she has accumulated over 1,000 hours of in-person facilitation experience, including extensive work with higher education leadership and boards of trustees. She has developed qualitative and quantitative research projects for hundreds of clients to help them better understand their position in the marketplace and consumer attitudes about their organization. She translates research finding into what's next with leadership teams, putting insights into actionable items, which is really important from that research. While she specializes in higher education, Kyndra has worked across multiple industries in the US and abroad. Welcome, Kyndra. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Steve. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I have a long, not as an illustrious career as you've had in branding and marketing, but
This means
this is
I'm old.
near and dear to my heart. So this is great because I think a lot of boards get into this branding conversation and they're sometimes not quite ready for it. So let's just jump in. The marketplace for higher education, as we all know, is becoming more competitive due to the shrinking number of traditional students, anyway. Competition from national online providers and competition from non-higher education credential providers like coding boot camps, Google, and others. So colleges and universities, and many times their boards, are turning to a brand campaign as the solution to their enrollment and fundraising problems. What do you think the advantages and the drawbacks are from this approach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the advantages are in that word competition, as you mentioned. The fact is that there are thousands of higher educational options in the United States, and all of them are competing for the best students, however you'd like to define that. And they need to figure out how to get through the noise. The noise has gotten louder and louder the longer I've been in this field, and so they're trying to figure out, how do we cut through that noise? How do we make ourselves be heard? How do we do that in a way that's going to really resonate with the stakeholders that we want?
Mm-hmm.
The drawbacks to that, I think, is that it can become a stand-in for substantive work. And what I mean by that is that one of the things we do when we go in and we talk to clients and we say, okay, so you're looking for a brand reboot, or you're looking for brand clarification, or in some cases you're looking for a new brand. Usually not. Usually it's a kind of build it as you fly the airplane kind of a situation. But one of the disadvantages is they get distracted by the art, by the shiny, by the creative. And one of the things that we try to start with is a little bit of a, let's all make sure we're on the same page. And that is, a brand is just a stand-in for the word reputation. It is not just a tagline, a logo, new colors, a fancy campaign. It is absolutely not. The problem with mistaking a brand for those trappings of a brand is that they miss the opportunity to do the work. And that is essentially to figure out, really, what is our reputation? How do we want to steer that? How do we build that internally first and then externally? Because it's really about, how do we make sure that when we project a brand, we are delivering on that brand and doing that in a really tight, authentic way.
Boy, that is such a common experience across the marketing and branding world of, we want to sound better, but we don't want to do the work to make us better.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be ungenerous, but a lot of times it's kind of true. It's like, well, if we just I've been to academic conferences where leaders will stand up and say, if the public just knew our story,
Yeah, the
they
best
would
kept
like us
secret.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I told them, it's like, yeah, when I'm dating, if a date doesn't like me, I just keep talking about myself until she does. Right. And it's like, it doesn't. And they're like, well, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. It's like,
Yeah. I mean, institutions are human organizations, and I honestly feel like it's a very human problem, right? Like, I could go out and do the hard work of eating better and exercising,
mm-hmm.
or I could try to find something slimming like flex. And I think that's the temptation is what can we do that's quick, that's going to look like progress rather than really having to think about how do we align our operational capacity and our strengths with the target audiences that we serve, because that is substantive, difficult, probably unpopular work in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
cases.
Yeah.
But that's where true reputations are built. And that's really where the strongest brands are.
Right. And it is hard. I mean, cultures are what they are. They're entrenched and it's tough. What's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me is the numbers are going to be rough, so don't hold me to them. About 70 some odd percent of students go to an institution in their own state,
Yes.
and 50 some odd percent go within like less than an hour from their home address.
Mm-hmm.
And so are publics just really on the public side? Are they just competing with the college up the street?
In a lot of cases, yes. I mean, that's just the fact that if students are unwilling to go too far, then yeah, those are their options. But then we can start talking about where the institution is going to make its money, and those are a little bit different, right? If you're dealing with a lot of in-state students versus out-of-state students, or even better, international students or graduate students that are international, then the dollar signs start just to shift around a little bit.
Have you been involved in marketing to out-of-state and international students
I
for
have, yes.
colleges? Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
how is that different? How do they approach that differently than your in-state conversation to an out-of-state or out-of-country student?
Well, it's interesting. I think in that case, it really often does boil down to brand awareness, especially when you're talking internationally. I've worked, I can think of a project I worked with that was recruiting international engineering students from China, from India, from all kinds of places. Interestingly, I've worked in China with a K-12 private school that was trying to figure out how to market itself to upwardly mobile Chinese who were looking for a K-12 school that would prepare their students to go to name brand institutions in the US. And so it was kind of a flip side of the same issue. And in that case, it really did come down to they've heard of the school and therefore they trust it. And that is, in a lot of ways, the beginning of brand strategy is how do we make sure you've at least heard of us? So that when we start to build that story a little bit more, you're like, oh, I've heard of you. And that starts to, again, it's a very human thing. It starts to build that sense of comfort.
That probably explains why the last 10 or 15 years, I've seen an explosion of higher education advertising in airports.
Yes.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, because those, students don't typically get a lot of financial aid. And so they represent a higher revenue point.
Yeah, out of state. Yeah, out of state and international. You bet.
It's a smart strategy.
So, how have you seen marketing and branding for higher education evolve over the last 20 years? Let's say, how has it kind of shifted based on new realities?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting time to be involved. Let me just say that, because I remember reading a book that basically said there were three at the time, unmarketed holdout bastions, and they were higher educational institutions, hospitals, and churches at the time. And the reason for that was that they had a mission, they had a calling that was supposed to rise above that kind of
crass marketing,
exactly, consumerist kind of mentality. And so when I started, it was regularly that we were told, do not use the words marketing. Do not ever refer to our students and our stakeholders as customers. Absolutely not, because you will get a riot. We will lose your audience if you start talking like that. Because at the time, and in some cases still, people just don't want to think of themselves in those terms.
And to be fair, the consumer model doesn't quite work in higher ed because it's complicated. We don't have to get into that, but there's some absolute fairness to that concern. But please continue.
And hospitals, I mean, they all have similar things in common, where there's sort of supposed to be an altruistic part of it. So initially it was like we didn't want to hear that language. But then the other piece of it that in the last 20 years is that marketing itself has changed in a lot of ways. I mean, when I got
what's this internet thing? I don't. What's
Exactly.
What's YouTube? What's TikTok? What's Instagram?
What's an e-newsletter? I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
not even, going back to the beginning. I mean, that was
Hmm.
that was a mid 90s kind of a
Hmm.
thing. So when I got into this, it was really about print mailings, and view books. And, that was the deal. And since then it's become this whole other omni-channel kind of thing, that is significantly more complicated, but also has brought with it a whole new level of sophistication regarding the metrics and the analytics that you can use to be more smart about your spend. And that's really where a lot of enrollment managers and leaders are thinking about things now.
And
But
talking
they
to, sorry,
oh, just that,
I,
that they didn't have that capacity. If you sent out a mailing, you could basically say people showed up or they didn't. But now you can literally follow them around the internet. So.
hmm. What's interesting is a lot of schools still send really very expensive
Mhm.
mail packages to traditional age students that are doing well or tested well in the ACT or the SAT. Now, are they marketing to the student or are they marketing to the parents in that particular instance, or both?
Well, those are two answers to that.
Okay.
They have started to recognize that the parents are huge influencers, or they have the capacity to be huge influencers. And so most good campaigns at this point, most good marketing strategy now includes a family component, who the families are, what they need to hear, what their concerns are. So they are absolutely being included in that funnel now. The high dollar piece that you're talking about, the view book or some of those other kinds of things, those are usually for the students.
Yeah. Okay.
And the reason for that is, as complicated as marketing has gotten, we are still fundamentally the primal beings we always are. We always were. And people like to get fun mail. That's just a fact. And so as cheap and as trackable and as complicated as the digital can get, it's fun to get something in the mail. And so all of the survey metrics that, we keep measuring this to see, like, hey, is there any way we can drop these because they're really expensive? And the answer is no. People like a mix. So
Interesting.
yeah.
How do you think, now we're talking, and this is a challenge for all of us in society, is we tend to think of college students as 17 and 18-year-old freshmen or what have you.
Mhm.
But we know that there's this huge demographic shift happening as far as age and non-traditional students, especially the needs for continuing education or finishing credentials or what have you, as well as the type of student that's coming. We know the Hispanic population in the United States is growing exponentially. We know that whites will no longer be the majority in 2050, 2060.
Right.
And are we ready for that kind of difference of student that we're getting in how we're looking at our branding, and the reputation side of the equation?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The adult student has been on people's radars for quite a while, actually. So I would say that trend has come through probably already, easily 15 years ago. I mean, not come through, not in the sense that it's gone, but started to
Yep.
become like, hey, this is, the average age of the average college student for a while there was like 26,
Yeah.
and so people started realizing we were thinking about this all wrong. The demographic, the ethnicity and the gender, frankly, has been changing, and is about to change, like you said,
Hmm.
significantly. People talk about this enrollment cliff, and I've seen several maps. One of them shows continental United States. Almost every state is in red, right? Because it's going to show a decline in traditional students. Then, if you parse that by ethnicity, the few states that are going to show some growth are among students of color.
Hmm.
So it's exactly to your point of where there will be growth, it will be among students of color. Where this adds complication in some cases is that 30 something percent of incoming freshmen are going to be first generation. So certainly not always, but in some cases, students of color are more likely to be first generation students, or to come, to be sooner in their family than other white families. And so with that, that means No one in their household really knows how to help them navigate the applications process or the FAFSA, or how to even compare, schools one from another. And so those types of concerns, those types of questions are certainly some that schools are starting to think about how to answer and how to address.
Are they experimenting and getting some success, and how they parse their adults, first generation, multi-generation? Are they experimenting with how they approach their audiences?
Yeah, some are, and some are doing a great job with it. It gets complicated quickly because, say, for example, I did a project with an institution that was trying to increase its outreach and its Latina population. And what we found, though, was that the students themselves are likely to be bilingual in some cases, not every. I mean, so this is a huge generalization, but in this particular project, you had students who were first-generation Americans who were bilingual because they spoke English in school and Spanish at home. Parents might be Spanish speakers only and might have been originally from a different country, may not have statistically even graduated from high school. So the educational process and even the language that you use is going to be different for that family. And so in that case, that institution had to figure out, in which cases do we speak in English? In which cases do we speak in Spanish? How do we make sure that these parents are comfortable sending their child who is a bilingual speaker, who's, a two-culture kind of a kid, to an institution? So yeah, some of them are really getting into that kind of depth. Others are still hoping that Google Translate will do the job for them, and it will not. So yeah.
Yeah. The back to an earlier question, when college leaders engage you, or boards engage you, what are they hoping to accomplish versus what are the realities that they can accomplish through a branding strategy? Is that question too broad?
That question
we hinted at it earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That question might be too incisive, and I think it would probably require a little bit of therapy on the behalf of the board. Because the fact is, a brand as a reputation, it takes a long time and a lot of discipline to build. And boards cycle on and off, presidents come and go. And what I have observed is that, as soon as a new president steps in, momentum tends to stall until that person's got their feet under them. And then everyone kind of waits to see what's going to be their issue, what's going to be their project, what's going to be their initiative. And, in some cases it's, hey, let's do a new brand. And so whatever work had been going up until that moment gets scrapped or
thrown out. Yeah.
Thrown out. Yeah. So I wouldn't say that. I don't know how do I want to say this. I think people need to be realistic about it. I put metrics around any of my brand marketing plans so that we can measure what are we hoping to accomplish with this, and by when, and by how much.
Increase applications, or do this, that, and the other. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Or if it's like we need to build, I've done things where it's like we need to assess what kinds of programs the marketplace demands now, and then figure out how to build that capacity internally and then market that capacity to the workforce, and then figure out how that's going to work.
Do they do that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. A lot of colleges won't. They won't go like, what does the community need? Let's build that. Let's go market that. They'll go, we want to talk about ourselves. Let's talk about ourselves.
Yeah, no, I've been on plenty of projects that are, that they are trying to figure out. And part of it is trying to figure out, again, that intersect of what do we have and what do we do well, and what do they need, and so they're looking for unmet opportunities both within the capacity of their faculty and in the community itself.
That seems like the right approach to me. I mean, having an opinion about this, it's like, what are the God forbid, what are the needs the community has, and then how do we meet those?
Right.
Seems like a very healthy approach, which is, some would say it's beyond brand. It's both. It ties into everything, right? And so that's where it gets like, when does branding stop and when does operations begin? And that sort of intersection gets complicated, as happens in the corporate world where most of my experience is in. And that's been like, we need to change something in order to talk about it a certain way, right? Or
Yeah,
we
I
need to
tell
offer
clients
something new.
it
Yeah.
starts with your product. It starts with your
Yeah.
product is what I say. And if your product is broken, don't market it.
Yeah.
And the product would be, of course, the quality of the preparation and the education that they are giving to their students, and measured by, I think one could reasonably argue, how they're able to use that out in the
Hmm.
world. Now, with research organizations, that's a whole other thing. Research institutions, different type of product,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think there are institutions that are certainly trying to address that, trying to build their brands on being responsive. That's part of
So
their
you,
brand.
so you talked about reputation, and prestige is the driver in higher education. Use your China example.
Mhm.
It's people go, if we're highly regarded, people will throw money at us. And so a
Mhm.
lot of college presidents or boards or whatever will go, well, we want to be known as the Harvard of pick our corner of the world.
Yep.
We want to be, we want to be that. And is that helpful? I mean, we've talked before, and you've mentioned this has come out of people's mouths. I've
Mhm.
heard it. What's your response to that?
I try and be gracious, to be honest with you. I've heard several iterations. I think that the consultant face is to be like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
but no, I've heard several. I mean, my favorite was Harvard on the Highway. We're the Harvard on the Highway, because it was a community college system that was located off the highway, and they thought they were the best. So there you
Yeah.
go, the Harvard of the Highway. I think that is an example of how the exercise of brands ends up being too surface. That people have this inferiority complex about themselves and are not trying to authentically focus on their strengths and figure out how to best serve the constituents they serve best. But rather, they are trying to be someone they're not.
Which brings me to, in my experience, I've kind of thought of brand strategies in three buckets. There's the authentic brand where,
Mhm.
as you said, you focus on their strengths, talk about who they really are, and that's really good. I think for boards and trustees, that's the best advice. It represents who they are and what they stand for. There's the aspirational brand where they're working on it, like they're legitimately taking the steps to become what they're saying. And then and this is not generous, but I call it the propaganda brand. It's like,
Mhm.
this is who we pretend we are. We might think we are, but this has nothing to do with actually how things are. Um, or again, so another way, it's like a wishful thinking brand. Where are you
Mhm.
finding colleges and universities kind of landing? If we use that spectrum of three, where are they landing in that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when they land in that mistaken, completely off base
The wishful
brand,
thinking.
the
Yeah.
wishful thinking bucket.
Yeah.
My experience is that it's not because they are being fraudulent, it's
Yeah.
because they are navel gazing, to be honest, that they have not gotten outside the confines of their own environment for way too long. And so they are looking at what they do well and they are going, yeah, we're the Harvard on the Highway or whatever. And so what I do in a lot of cases, so ideally a brand, for example, and back up a little bit on how brand strategy typically gets built. You obviously interview and do research with internal stakeholders.
So let's not be obvious. Some people won't know this.
Oh,
So
okay, sorry.
yeah.
Okay,
So
so there's
explaining this is great. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so
I probably should have asked you that up top. So that's my
that's okay.
key as an interviewer. Yeah.
Yeah. So I approach all of it with research. I mean, I think it should be data driven. And I use a simple Venn diagram to organize the way I collect my research. So if you look at the top circle, that would be like, who are we? And that would be your legacy. That would be your strong programs. That would be the types of students you typically serve well. There would be a lot of things in there that represent you as an institution. The second circle would be who are we trying to serve? And there's segments and there's sub segments, right? So we might have, say, a regional public would have traditional undergraduate students. It would have graduate students. It might have some, international, it might be a researcher. There would be subsegments in there, but it would be generally students and their families. The third category was essentially like, what's going on in your market? So when we talked at the very beginning about what's that noise that you're trying to cut through, that would be a question of, who are your competitors? What are they saying about themselves? What are they doing really well? And so in that wishful thinking bucket, here's what I think is happening, is that the people in that top circle are only really looking at their circle, and they're saying, we're the Harvard of wherever. And so the way I like to handle that is to say, okay, that might be true, but then I go talk to their prospective students and I say, where else did you look? And that's really where data can come back and go, you know what, you might think you're the Harvard of wherever, but the fact is, they're looking just down the street. They would not even consider you as being on that level. And it can be a little bit of a shock, sometimes a little bit of an eye opener, but it's important to hear from the consumers, from the prospective audiences themselves, who they consider your competitors to be, because that's really where the truth is.
So you need to go out and talk to people.
You do, yes.
Yeah. So we'd hire, we being an institution, hire someone like, either use our internal marketing team or hire a consultant, usually hiring a consultant because whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to go interview what you like, I'm sure. So prospective students, families, probably the business community, right?
Yes.
How do you think of the institution? And gather that data and then go, here's what people really think about you rather than what you think about yourself. Am I getting that right? Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I look for those, what are the connections? What are the disconnections? And then how are we going to manage that? How does that match up with the metrics that we have on you, and to find, like, going back to your question about what is an aspirational brand, I get asked that question a lot. Like, how much do we base our brand on who we are now versus where we're hoping to go? And this is not mathematical necessarily, but I typically say it's somewhere in the 80-20, because you need to be true. It's got to feel relevant and credible to you and to your stakeholders. But it can also be a little bit of a reasonable growth opportunity. It should be.
That's a good guess, right? Yeah.
I mean, it felt right. Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting though, I'm conflating a couple thoughts at once, but hopefully we can tease it apart. So if you've ever watched college sports on TV, they get a 30-second spot, usually during a break, right? And I've thought, if you strip out some physical characteristics and the name of the institution, they all kind of begin to look alike. Some of the most creative ones are amazing and they're not used anymore. But there's this rush to identify us with the stereotype. We're going to have the student in goggles with a beaker over a Bunsen burner, and
ideally
a professor,
a woman looking at some colored,
and a professor of color in a classroom pointing at the chalkboard, right? And then the students in the quad doing the, they're all scrub faced and good looking. And so that makes sense. You have to appeal to what people know and get. But when it comes to creating sort of a distinct voice for yourself, how do you kind of go about that without trying to, so you don't sound like everyone else? Because actually, if you think about it, might be controversial. We're actually in a commodity business almost. The degree, the knowledge is, you can get it kind of anywhere, but the experience of what happens to you at the institution is what is different, whether it be online or in person or what have you. Sorry, lot there. Pick one. Go.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I resonate with what you're saying in the sense that here again is where, you're trying, because I have sat through so many meetings where they say, well, Kyndra, what you really need to understand is that what makes us special is that our teachers really care about our students.
Oh, no, ours are really dedicated.
Yes. Every place we go. And we used to joke when I was on the road a lot that it didn't matter where you went. They would say, well, here we have a saying, and that is that if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. And they would laugh like they had kind of coined that term themselves. And then I would go to the next city and they would say the same thing. And that kind of happens to be honest with you, in those preliminary meetings, this is why I think data is really important, is that they'll say, here, this is what makes us really special. And then in some cases, we come back with the data and say, actually not even your students agree with that. Or that's not what you are known for, or, whatever it is that they think might be true. One of the frustrations, I'll be honest with you, about higher ed brand marketing is that the good side of collaborative higher educational decision making is that it does not tend to produce really authentic creative. And the reason for that is everyone wants an opinion. It tends to get wordsmithed and chiseled down until it sounds exactly like everyone else.
Right.
So if I have to hear the words transformative and engaged and, some of these things anymore, you want to poke yourself in the eye, but they think sometimes that they're the only ones who've ever used those terms. I think it's going to come down to leadership, courage. I feel like really great strategy should be like if leadership and creativity got together and had a baby called courage. I think that would be amazing. Because the fact is that in a lot of cases, nobody really wants to be that leader who takes a huge chance on being really authentic. And that is, over my 20 years, the direction, and we can thank social media for this, that is what marketing needs to be these days. People don't want to see polished. They don't believe it. It needs to be a little bit rough around the edges for them to believe that they're getting the true scoop. And unfortunately, a lot of the way that higher educational leaders approach the decision about what are we going to do for our messaging ends up polishing it.
Yeah. What could be a simple step? So, because no one's going to flip a switch and go all a new direction, but what's a simple step a board or a president or whatever is in charge of this could take to something a little bit more authentic?
I think they should be willing to test some of the crazier options with their target audience. And again, one of sort of the old jokes is, we're making messaging for 17 to 18-year-olds. It's probably developed by a 30-year-old. It's approved by a 50-year-old and or older. And in a lot of cases, again, these are human organizations. And, that person who's used to making decisions is like, I don't like it. It doesn't speak to me. Failing to consider it's not for you, right? This is not for you. It's for the audience that it's going to, and let's test it with them and be willing to try it with them.
So board members often look like, I have gray hair. For people that are listening to this, they won't know that, but I have gray hair, and a lot of people on boards do, regardless of the institution. And if not, they might color it. So, either gender, right? That not being specific on that. But sometimes, I think that the bias would be, it doesn't reflect my experience that I remember fondly through rose-colored glasses of what college was like, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And it's a new era.
It is a new era. And I think the call, if there was going to be kind of a call to leaders in high places in higher education would be, take a dose of your own lesson in that you need to continue to have a humble, learning-oriented approach to everything, including these types of decisions. Because if this project will be successful, it needs to be something that may not be comfortable to you. And up to and including, I'll give you an example of this. I have worked with several institutions in Colorado who have said, we don't want to talk about mountains, for example. Like, we don't think we need to mention that to our students, because what we want is for the sheer strength of the academics to be the driving point. Well, that's great, but not to a 17-year-old who's moving here to Massachusetts,
Right.
So, and that
again,
would be,
and that's in-state it's an in-state out-of-state, because the state you're in, if you're in California, well, you can go to the beach whenever you want, right? And if you're going to a college that's 20 minutes, 30 minutes from where you already live, or in Colorado, you're going, in state, you can do that in time. But yeah, from out of state, that is a unique characteristic.
Yep.
Right. I don't know how you'd sell that Nebraska is a very pretty state. People don't know that, but it's like that would be harder to do for, a Midwestern state.
Yeah, unless you can capture, I mean, this to go into the idea of what is truly unique about an institution, that is one of the things that's truly unique. I mean, if you can figure out how to really capture the strengths of that and convey that to people, that is one thing that the other institutions will never be able to replicate, is your exact location. So figuring out, that to me would be a leverageable asset if you're willing to talk about it. But you also have to be willing to get beyond yourself as an academic and go, maybe they're not coming here strictly for the philosophy. They might also be coming here, to ski sometimes, or whatever it is.
And how did you deal with that on online? Because that takes all that away.
Yeah, online is that's I just did a project on that, and that was really interesting. Online becomes a function of, again, your adult learners typically are more interested in online, and so really the values there need to be about showing them how flexible that you can be, how much you understand the fact that they are working this into 9 other things, how accessible you can be for them when they have the time. For example, I've worked on projects where they're like, oh yeah, we absolutely prioritize our adult learner population, and then we go around and we go, well, the financial aid's office closes at 5, so is that really, again, this is where operational and branding tie together, is that if you're really going to say that about yourself, you need to make sure your operations support that. And then also, with online, I would say that's, the competition just widens even further, because it doesn't matter, where they're located anymore.
Yeah. I interviewed a gentleman in Scott Van Pelt. He was a co-author of a book called The Great Upheaval. And he made an argument in this transition time in higher education that smaller institutions that are more experimental, and this would include in their offerings as well as what we're talking about, he didn't get into it, but it would apply in their branding, in their voice. The smaller institutions that are struggling the most, the ones that will do that will adapt and survive. And then they will become the test subjects that the larger institutions will go, oh, it worked there, we might give it a shot in the sliver here. And then the adaptation will begin to take place elsewhere, which it ties in really nicely with what we're talking about. Let me ask you a couple more quick questions. What do you think when you're dealing with boards and trustees or university leaders, what are they not asking that they maybe should be when it comes to looking at being competitive in the marketplace?
Oh, that's a good question. What are they not asking for that they should be in terms of being competitive? I hate to go back to the beginning, but I think outcomes is going to be a big one. It was in the beginning, truly, that when we talked about what do you need to be showcasing in your brand, it was all about outcomes. And when we talked about outcomes, we meant, are they getting jobs? Are they contributing? Or if you're a research institution, talk about how that's changing the field, not just how much money you brought in last year, but to really talk about how you are moving the needle in the field, whatever that field happens to be. That means they need to track them, and they need to be looking further outside of their own walls, to be thinking about where the community is headed, where the world is headed, and preparing people to be able to jump to that when they're done with their degree.
Have you had any, without obviously naming names, have you had any experience where it's just like, all right, you're going to do the same old, we'll take your money, but you didn't take our best work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What was the driver behind that?
To
Drivers,
cutting the knees off of the work that we did is politics, I think. In some cases, the
internal politics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and this is kind of classic, consulting 101 problem where your client is a VP, but then, and they're told you have, full authority, you have all my confidence, you can do whatever you like. And then when they do, they are told, I don't like it, we're going to go with my idea. And that's enormously frustrating. And not just because, I mean, technically the consultant still gets paid, right? But it is deeply unsatisfying because you see the potential. You did the results, you did the research, and you're like, here was what was best for you. Here's what the research said. And they're like, nope.
Yeah. What's interesting is then why did we hire a consultant at all? Because we have internal people that are perfectly capable of doing really good at larger institutions, really good work. And we hired outside experts to bring in a fresh perspective, and then we just ignore them.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Yeah.
does happen. I'm happy to say it has been exceptional in the many projects that I've had. I think most of the time they hire you with the intention of actually hearing what you have to say.
That's great.
Yeah, but it is, I mean, I recognize that in some cases I'm brought in to tell them their baby might be ugly, which is a difficult place,
and you need an outside person to do that, because I don't want to lose my job. Absolutely.
No,
or you won't listen to me because you see me too often. Yeah.
You see me too often, or one of the reasons that I often ask internal folks, even if they have the same skills I do, truly, I mean, in a lot of cases, it's like, you could do this work, but the fact is you're too close. And so when someone says your baby's ugly, then unfortunately, being humans, the internal person might go, well, the reason you need to understand that it's ugly is because the following things happen. And then they've switched from researcher mode and into, let me try and explain and justify why it's like that. And they're too close.
Yeah. And that's again, back to human, that's natural.
Human nature. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because if you're told to do something and then you had to do it and then you said it's no good, it's like, well, here's how that came to be. Yeah. Here's how, what was that Pontiac Aztec automobile came to be? One of the ugliest cars ever made, ugliest vehicles ever made. It was done by committee. Yeah. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. A couple last things. Is there anything you'd like to share about boards being involved in the branding process, engaging with branding and marketing consultants that I haven't asked that you think would be interesting to share?
I mean, this is not going to sound like rocket science. It's not. I think if boards and if leaders are willing to go into a process with an open mind, and if they are willing to actually consider how they could do their part of aligning whatever that brand is with what's going on operationally, I think they do stand a much better shot of building an authentic brand and authentic reputation. If they are willing to take, in some cases, what might be some unpopular stances on saying, look, those things are going to be cut in favor of doing these other things because these other things are going to be brand aligned. I realize that's deeply unpopular and difficult place to be in, but that would be their role.
Yeah. Well, especially as the marketplace becomes more competitive against smaller institutions, you've defined what that is, need to get more specialized and distinct to be competitive in an increasingly competitive place. So that will be interesting.
Yes.
So this is the last question I like to ask all my guests. What do you like most about working with your higher education clients or working in higher education?
There's two answers to that question. There's sort of the overall umbrella. So as a brand strategist, I would say the overall umbrella brand. Okay. The umbrella brand about what I like the most is that, unlike some of my colleagues who are in brand strategy, I believe in this product. I'm not selling yoga mats. I'm not selling makeup. Nothing against yoga mats or makeup, but I truly believe that most of the time people will be better for having engaged with this product. Not selling anything they don't need necessarily. So that's the umbrella piece. My favorite, though, is working with community colleges, and increasingly it's working with Hispanic serving institutions and colleges and institutions that can point. One of their outcomes is that they change life trajectories, that as a result of the work that they do, that family's legacy will forever be changed. And I think I get emotional on that one because I just think that's what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my favorite. Yeah.
We're in the life-changing business.
That's right.
That's what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Again, Kyndra, thank you so much for your time. This is a great conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Steve.
All right, take care.
Take care.